Today, as we have been the last several days, we are continuing my reviews of the Netflix adaptation of Avatar The Last Airbender, and today we continue that with episode 5, titled Spirited Away. We are going to break it down and talk about it in this video. My fellow benders of all four nations, welcome to Uncle Iroh's tea shop, the Jasmine Dragon. Find yourself a seat, grab some jasmine tea, and enjoy the video. With my recent videos, let's see if we can hit a goal of 200 likes on this one. Like I mentioned in my recent reviews, be sure to keep the comments and dialogue to this episode and this episode only. Regarding my thoughts on the episode itself, this one is so interesting for me. I mean, there are decisions that are made in this episode that I questioned heavily and almost really disliked, and then there's also some stuff that I did like, and I'm glad that they touched up upon. So, of course, this episode is the beginning of the winter solstice portion of the season. There's also an inclusion of some other stuff inside of it from other parts of the cartoon as well, but again, we are going to talk about that stuff because I have a lot of thoughts on it. Of course, we know it starts with the winter solstice because it begins with our crew running away from Fire Nation soldiers, and as they are running away and flying on Appa, they come across the burnt up forest that the Fire Nation laid waste to. Now, one of the things that I was hoping that this live action version would communicate to me before the show had even come out was that it was able to address and show how much the Fire Nation affected the world through the war. This is one of those parts of the cartoon where it is definitely communicated heavily, and I think they nailed the portrayal of how bad it looks with the visuals, but also how Aang and the gang are distraught from it. This then leads them to that village that the cartoon established with regards to the fact that people inside of it are being taken away from something very mysterious. This, of course, is relating to the Hei Bei spirit, who believes that the forest has been negatively affected by this, which causes him to take away these villagers. Aang feels that it is his responsibility to get them back, and so he goes to the statue of the spirit to try and go into the spirit world to get them back. So again, this is a big change up from the original, because in the original, he was portrayed more as a horror-like scenario, where nobody really knew what the spirit was and what it was doing, and it was just very terrifying as it came into the real world to take these people away. We don't get to see any of that stuff, and so the way that they get into the spirit world, in this case, Aang, Sokka, and Katara, is more simplistic as Aang does it through meditation. Now, here is where the first thing that makes absolutely no sense to me comes into play. I am not exactly sure why the show makes the decision to include both Sokka and Katara in this journey when they themselves don't control this kind of power that Aang has. There's a bit of a half-ass explanation for it, given Aang tries to think of a reason why they are there, and even my confused brain was as bewildered as he was when he was trying to think of how they were in on it with him. Now, to be clear, I don't like the choice to include them because it doesn't make sense within the lore of how the spirit world works when transferring somebody into it, and at least with the way that this version of the show communicates it. Maybe I'm off on that one and you guys have an idea as to how this happens, but that's just me. Thankfully though, even though I was very confused by this, what ends up coming from it with Sokka, Katara, and Aang is some really nice character development. Before we get into any of that though, I really need to touch up on what happens after that, because this absolutely annoyed the hell out of me. So the very first thing that our crew comes across in the spirit world as they are walking through it trying to figure out what's going on is none other than them coming across Wong Shi Tong. When this happened, my mouth was agape for 10 minutes at least, and just utter shock of what I was looking at. Now, firstly, I'll address this because there is something that I do like about what's going on here. For one, I think they nailed the design, the CGI on him, and also the voice is fantastic on this character. All that stuff is really good. The problem in lines with why he's even there in the first place. Now, technically in the lore, he is a spirit, so by definition, you could technically say that he should show up there in the spirit world. However, the why of it all is the reason why we are having this conversation. I know some people might like the fact that they are seeing him here, but for me, there is absolutely no justifiable reason why he, of all people, needs to show up in this episode. To me, this actually takes away the runtime of something else that they probably could have done, and I just personally believe that they should have saved this. The other thought in my head, which is a very bad thought, is the fact that what if this is a predicament where something else terrible could come down the line if a season 2 would have happened? He is a character that does not show up until book 2, and I'm a little worried that they might do away with him in season 2 if this is the only time that we ever see him. I'm definitely going to be making a separate video on this after I'm done with all my review videos, so that's another conversation for another time, but it is definitely something to keep in mind as a negative thought. Now, who we see next show up is none other than Hei Bei himself in his monstrous form, and again, they absolutely absolutely nailed the design and the look of this character. It looks menacing and terrifying, which is what it's supposed to be. After he attacks our gang, everybody gets split up yet again, and this time it is for a reason given. This now leads into everybody going on their own separate journey within the spirit world. This is also now where they attempted to, at least from the looks of it, try and adapt something that we also see in book 2 as well with this. They tried to attempt and adapt what happens in the 4th episode of book 2 called The Swamp, where our characters get dumped in this swamp area that is filled with spirit vines that basically take them into a spirit world type place. To showcase how they are adapting it here in this episode, they show that Sokka is able to see a 3-tailed white fox, which is the sign of none other than the character of Yue. Katara hallucinates about seeing her mother, and then for Aang, instead of it being Toph like in the cartoon, he actually is able to see Monk Gyatso again. So for those wondering, if season 2 gets made and it was going to adapt the swamp episode, it seems like that's not going to happen given they pretty much do it right here in this episode. Now, admittedly, it is a little frustrating that that is the case given how crammed it is into this episode, but I do think it leads to some great scenes that I want to talk about. I think that Katara had a nice look back on what had happened into the Southern Water Tribe and her mother when the Fire Nation attacked, and it traumatizes her given they actually show that one of the Fire Nation raiders killed her mom right in front of her. For those wondering, this is intact with the lore of what happens to the character, as it's said that she was killed during the raid on the village. Now, they don't show it in the cartoon, but they do here, so that's another change. Sokka suffers through trauma as well, as he sees himself in a flashback to when he had a moment in the Southern Water Tribe of which explores his training through ice dodging. We see his father show up, but we also get a surprise reveal of none other than Bato himself. Bato is a character that was not casted before the show came out, and so this is a surprise reveal given this is the only time that he shows up in the show, but honestly, I like that they included him here. This, of course, as I said, is a traumatizing event for Sokka, given he actually didn't really pass in the training, and so his father looks down on him for that, and it doesn't feel he's ready for the task at hand of being a warrior. So in a way, this is a little bit of a backstory look on the character with how he feels like he needs to prove himself to his father, kind of like how Zuko feels like he needs to prove himself to his father so that he can bring back the Avatar to him. I alluded to this in my episode 1 review, but next up, of course, we have the scenes between Aang and Gyatso. I think every scene that these two characters have with each other on screen is absolutely fantastic, and again, the actor who plays Gyatso does an amazing job. If there is one thing I absolutely have to give 100% credit to with regards to the show, it is that they nailed the relationship between these two characters. I know this is the last time that we are probably going to see this character in live action if we get 2 more seasons, at least with regards to this adaptation, but for me, even with how much we did get, they did a great job with it. Now, hold up. We're not done yet, because there is another thing that this episode crammed in that was very unexpected and also had me in a mixed bag kind of reaction. This is now, of course, the reveal of which this episode is adapting the character of Koh The Face Stealer. Basically, the reason he shows up in this episode is because he has trapped Sokka and Katara in their traumatized states and is planning to steal their faces if Aang doesn't find a way to make amends with him. Previous avatars had tangled with Koh, and because of this, he feels like something had been taken from him, and this is what Aang must solve by going to the Fire Nation Temple to speak to Roku. With regards to Koh himself, he is voiced by George Takei, who is a very well-known voice actor, and of course, the character is nothing but CGI, and I have to say, this is one of those times where the CGI is very noticeable, and honestly, not really the best. Given that the entirety of the character is so specific with his look in design, it is also a little difficult to translate it into live action, so I imagine the VFX artists did what they could with it. This is pretty much how the episode ends, as Aang comes back out of the spirit world to say goodbye to Katara and Sokka, along with saying goodbye to Appa and Momo, who have just been really chilling and just relaxing, waiting for everything to happen in the background, it seems. Aang then goes on his way to the Fire Nation Temple as he flies over a city, and that is where it all ends. Now, I do want to touch upon a few other smaller things that the episode does, but are in the background more than the other stuff that's more important. We get a bunch of scenes with regards to Fire Nation characters such as Ozai, Azula, Mei, and Ty Lee. I thought that all these scenes were just fine. I mean, we see the process of which Azula is let in on with regards to everything that is around Ozai's operations. Azula also has a training scene of which we see her firebend for the first time, and if you notice like I did, there is a 1-second little snippet shot of her blue flames coming out for a quick second, so that's still very cool to see. Again, not much to talk about here, although I think that the scenes were just fine and they weren't that big of a deal. On the other side of the Fire Nation, we have Iroh and Zuko looking around for stuff to help them out with regards to searching for Aang, and they come across a little place where they try to get information, and there is one portion of dialogue that gets communicated back between him and these other two people, where they mention the fact that they had heard that Aang and the gang had been seen with pirates and also with the Canyon Guide, which basically alludes to the fact that at some point down the line, Aang and his friends had come across the storyline of the Great Divide episode from the cartoon, and also just happened to have come across the pirates that we know from the cartoon as well. It's a neat little Easter egg tie-in, I guess, if you want to put it that way. The other final thing that gets revealed in this episode is the first showcase of the character June and her Shirshu. I said from the start when this character was first revealed that I think that this is one of the best looks of a character in the entirety of the show, and honestly, now that I've actually seen the show, it is one of the better portrayals of a character. Arden Cho does a really good job with her. Overall, I thought this episode was just a mixed bag with probably more weaker elements than stronger ones. I thought it had some good moments, but the other stuff with the spirit world and how cramped everything is definitely hinders it. So those are my final thoughts on episode 5 of the Netflix adaptation, and now we get to the most important part of every video, which is where I want you all to comment down below your thoughts on the episode itself and what you thought of my commentary of it. If you did enjoy this video or even enjoyed the episode, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new here, and turn on that notification bell for when I upload again in the future. On your way out of Uncle Iroh's tea shop, be sure to let him know how much you appreciate his jasmine tea and his words of wisdom that come with it. I hope you all have a good rest of your days, and I will see you soon for more Avatar.